Hello and welcome once again to White Lotus of Light educational series. This is episode 5 of Shadow Wars, All the World's a Stage. And so you may have noticed that I am wearing my Phrygian cap that a loved one got for me. And so this is a hat that has been worn by people since ancient times. Especially in the Caucasus Mountain regions down into sort of modern day Turkey. So the hat was popular in quite a number of different times for thousands of years. And it's had different meanings, and it's been associated both with really bad stuff and with really amazing and great stuff, and with alchemy and with healing in particular. And so I am hoping to invoke those alchemical and healing vibes a bit today for folks who are watching this. And plus, I really need a haircut, and so going with the Phrygian cap today. All right, so there is a lot to cover in today's episode, and I was going to do the Luciferians, and then just based on some messages from the angels, like that emergency sort of broadcast thing I did a few days ago, I just realized I really need to just cover emerging events in geopolitics and finance, which are inextricably interlinked. And so I'm going to jump into that. But first, I just wanted to say, thank you so much for all the people. I have had more growth in the past 3.5 months since, past 4.5 months since I did an angelic magic ritual with some of my angel magic students, more on that later, than I have had in the prior 2 years. And so a lot of that's due to Sam Tripoli. So shout out to Sam once again. But I think a lot of it is just that the content on this channel is speaking to people, and it's helpful to people, and I intend to provide more of that. And one of the things that makes me able to have the time, because I'm very busy and I've been dealing with a lot of stuff of getting my family prepared for what I see unfolding. And so that's been taking up my time, as has making money. And so one thing that really, really helps me out and is super duper appreciated is my patrons over at Patreon. You can also hit join here in the channel and get the exact same benefits you'd get if you joined via Patreon. I just believe I get a bigger slice from Patreon. And so I just want to give a quick shout out to Molite, to Dan Whippy, who's down under and down there in Australia, and to Ryan Chandler. Thank you to all you guys who are my patrons. Really appreciate you. And this is your shout out. That's including things not everyone likes a shout out, as it turns out. So that's purely optional. If you're more of a private person and you don't want a shout out, just let me know, and I will do that. I appreciate all of them. And I would appreciate anyone else who wants to join. The more patrons I have, the more I can turn my attention to the YouTube channel and be spending less time doing other things to provide for my family. And so, yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So to start things off, back in 2000, the fall of 2000, or rather the winter term of 2000, I took a class called The Religions of India. And I had been very spiritual when I was a kid, but that sort of went away with the hormones around the time I hit 12. And my spirituality didn't reemerge until I took this Religions of India class. And I read this book called the Bhagavad Gita. And there's a line in it that says, essentially, basically Krishna and Arjuna are on the battlefield. Arjuna is worried about, he doesn't want to kill his cousins because it's a battle against his cousins and other royal house. And Krishna, his driver, turns out to be Krishna in disguise. And Krishna says to Arjuna, after freezing the entire battlefield around him, you need to follow through in this. It's your destiny. And Arjuna doesn't want to kill his cousin. He reiterates it. And Krishna says, well, you can't kill your cousin. And Krishna's like, well, Arjuna's like, what are you talking about? And Krishna says, well, when he dies, it's just like you changing a set of clothes. And Arjuna's like, well, how can that be? And he says, well, because your cousin is the Atman. and fire cannot burn it, sword cannot cut it, air cannot wither it, and water cannot drown it, for the Atman is eternal, timeless, and unchangeable. And that is the true nature of your cousin. And when I read that passage, like a sort of bell went off in my head, and that began sort of my spiritual journey. And a few months later, I was getting done with that term, and I hadn't eaten in a few days, and because I was a college kid and just burning the candle at both ends and cramming at the last minute, right? And I hadn't eaten much, so I had low blood sugar. That's relevant. And then I smoked a couple bong rips with my friends, and I then couldn't even play Mario Kart, the video game we're having. And so I went to lay down, and mind you, I was very I don't know, kind of like not spiritual, I guess is the best way of putting it. I mean, I had always been like at worst agnostic, but I always kind of deep down had a sense of that God was real, even though I rejected my Catholic upbringing in a pretty big way, to put it mildly. But I wasn't very spiritual at the time, to put it very mildly. So what was about to happen was quite odd and stunning. And I went into my room because I couldn't even play video games, and I laid down, and I had this whole very extensive vision, which I'm not going to get into all of it, but it sort of culminated in, there was this view of the United States from space, and I saw this impact on the East Coast. Now, mind you, I was living on the West Coast at the time, and I don't think the geography of it matters all that much, other than that where I saw this huge impact was over New York. So when 9/11 happened a few months later, I was like, oh my God, it's that vision I had. And I saw this huge black wave roll over, and it hit the West Coast. And then, mind you, I lived in the West Coast at the time, and I think that's the relevance of the West Coast in this image. I'm certainly not saying that the lefty West Coast is somehow a bastion of freedom. That's not really the point here. So this huge wave rolled over the West Coast, and then when it, or over the entire country, when it hit the West Coast, there was this pulse of light, and the wave stopped. And then in the wave, I saw these like alligators and deep sea fish and so forth biting each other. And then I saw the wave rise up again, and it slammed again, and again the light rose up to meet it. And then there was really frenzied activity of these different, like, it seemed like it was different evil groups that formed this giant black wave, were now starting to fight with each other. And all of a sudden this wave rose up way up into space. It was so high, this gigantic black wave, and it slammed again. And the light rose up to meet it, and as the wave hit it, it stopped and it shuddered for a minute, and then it turned into energy and light, this golden light. And I saw this wave of golden light just go all the way around the earth. And a voice said, and the light of humanity will spread once more across the world. So when 9/11 happened a few months later, I recognized that as the first wave. And then when 2008 happened, and mind you that there was, you know, it wasn't just the event on 9/11, and it wasn't just the stock market crash in 2008, but it was the events that flowed directly from them for some years afterwards that is relevant here and was part of that wave. There was an initial event that was like that, but then the after effects of that wave took some time to really come to fruition. So keep that in mind. So the third wave I recognized as the events of 2020 and up till now. And I believe that we're very close to the point to where that wave smashes, that's still rising up to like try and consume everything. And where that smashes and hits the light and dissolves, I think we're on the cusp of that. And I think that really symbolizes the end of Kali Yuga. And now, mind you, that darkness dissolved into light. And some of it was real light, right? The Most High. And some of it was undoubtedly false light. But nonetheless, the light of humanity, both false and real, spread once more across the world. Defeat of Moloch. I recognize that now, that was the meaning of this vision I had. It's interesting because Rudolf Steiner, a little over 100 years ago, he said that there was some kind of battle behind the scenes between the secret societies, the good and the evil ones, and the evil ones had won, and that the good secret societies would have to go into hiding for 100 years and go underground. And they began to reemerge. You know, he made that statement around 2013 or so, or excuse me, 1913 or so. And so in 2013 or so, some of these forces started to rise back up again. And you see that in various mystery schools and secret societies started to reemerge sort of from the shadows. So that is sort of like my introduction to what's happening here with current events that I really want to cover. So all the world's a stage. What I mean by that is, I mean that in the sense Shakespeare said it. I don't believe that everything is scripted, although I do believe a tremendous amount of things are planned and that there's many, many contingency plans. But of course, any soldier who's been in combat will tell you that plans dissolve upon contact with the enemy, and then you just kind of got to wing it. And sort of the people who are better at winging it while following discipline tend to do better. So here we are, and there's just incredible changes taking place. And so one of the most stunning things that I would have never, ever imagined happening in my lifetime is that China has done what seemed like it was the impossible to me. China has brokered a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Iran and Saudi Arabia have been fighting each other for, I don't know, 1,200, 1,400 years, I think, since the death of Muhammad. They've basically been fighting each other as Iran is crystallized around the Shia Muslims, and Saudi and most of the rest of the Muslim world is around the Sunni Muslims. And so China managed to get a broker a peace deal so they could reestablish relations. Now, they've had the break in relations for quite some time, but there's just been a general trend of divisiveness forever, and you can actually feel that something very significant has happened here, like earth-shattering. And it really shows that there is this changing world order, and the U.S. is if they don't get their shit together, and same thing with NATO in general, by which I mean the population getting rid of the idiots at the top, which is what we need to do. That's seems to be the only way out of this mess we're in, because I mean things are getting crazy. I mean, now look at this. You may or may not be aware of something called the Petro-Dollar, and I'm just going to real quick explain this super short version. You can go in depth. There's a million billion videos and articles on this. Okay, so the Petro-Dollar is incredibly important. 1970, I want to say 1971. If I'm off by year, whatever. And I also am not going to do a lot of heavy editing today. I'm going to be doing screen shares rather than editing in the clips later. So this is going to be a little rougher even than normal, if you can imagine that. So the Petro-Dollar. In 1971, Nixon cut the link of gold redeemability for the dollar. Now, U.S. citizens hadn't been able to redeem dollars for gold since like 1934, whenever it is that Roosevelt does the seizing everyone's gold, although that was like a weirdly voluntary thing and was just kind of a trick, and people gave their money, and that was a mistake. They did take some safety deposit boxes, but people who turned it in, turns out they were morons, of course. And so got rid of the convertibility for gold for citizens, but we still had it for international trade, and it was super relevant because after World War II, there's something called the Bretton Woods Agreement that made there was two competing models. There's the Keynes-Triffin model that said we should have a supernatural currency of some kind, meaning a currency, a one world bank and a one world currency. And the competing vision was which is what they went with, was that the US dollar would become the global reserve currency, and it was backed in gold. The US had only taken gold from the Allies throughout World War II for everything they did. And so we had a huge stockpile of gold, and we set the gold price to the dollar at $35 an ounce of gold. Just think about that. And so after a while, with the bread and not bread and circuses, but what was it called? Guns and butter. That's right. Johnson, which might as well be breads and circuses with an added war. Johnson spent a fortune, right? After Kennedy got taken out and we got rid of silver coinage, then Johnson started going nuts with Vietnam, right? And they spent just an absolute fortune at that. Well, the French president, Charles de Gaulle, who was a key figure in World War II, he was like, I don't think the Americans have as much gold as they're printing dollars, and therefore I'm going to get a bunch of our dollar holdings, we're going to convert them into gold, and we'll just get gold from the Americans. Well, Nixon and Kissinger caught hold of this, and as did the British, right? Like the Anglo-American Empire basically kicked into gear, which is to say the Venetian black nobility, right? And they realized that if this kind of rogue person in France, Charles de Gaulle, who they tried to kill him a few times, if he went to get that gold, that would disrupt the petrodollar, which was really important to the Venetians at that time. And so they said, hold that thought to Charles de Gaulle, and Kissinger went on a spree, and he got the Saudis to agree to sell oil only in the dollar. So then they turned around and they broke the link to the gold window. They closed the gold window, and they said, Charles de Gaulle, you can't get that gold. And now that would have been an act of war, except for they said, hey, but you like oil, right? And they were like, well, obviously we're an industrialized nation. We need oil. And they go, funny thing, you can only buy it in dollars now. And so that effectively made the dollar backed in oil, but only so long as the OPEC, which Saudi headed, would agree to sell oil only in dollars, right? That was critical. And you'll notice whenever someone went off the script, like Libya tried to sell it in gold and make a gold-backed dinar for Africa, right? And Gaddafi got, right? Saddam Hussein tried to sell oil for euros and some other stuff, and he was talking about selling it for gold. Kaboom, went in there and smashed him. So whenever anyone tried to disrupt that cartel, they would do something like Iran tried to do an oil burst a number of years ago, and they cut the cables to the burst, the underwater internet cables. So the U.S. took this stuff very, very seriously. Well, times they are changing, because like this was from Forbes, for crying out loud, which is just absolutely incredible to me that you see this headline that's so stark when most of the time they've said this conspiracy theory that there's a petrodollar. Petrodollar does, Petro-Dollar what investors need to know, right? March 27th, just a few days ago. I mean, and the hits just keep rolling because that's Forbes saying that. And why are they saying that? Well, they're saying that because there's just endless stuff going on with that. So India and China plan to do their trade and cut out the dollar. How about that? There we go. India and China plan to trade in their own currency and cut U.S. dollar dominance. Notice that's the 28th. So we're just looking at the 27th. Then we're looking at the 28th. But wait, there's more. Then you look at China will pay Russia in yuan for oil and gas, right? This is an older headline, but mighty, mighty relevant because that helped Russia get around the sanctions in a big way. And also selling oil and gas for rubles and yuan rather than the dollar. Again, dollar getting cut out. And but wait, there's yet even more, because let's see, where is this other one? There's also one directly between UAE and Brazil, and there's a few other ones. I mean, there's so many of these things like this going on that it's just absolutely wild. And the final hammer blow to fall, which hasn't happened yet, is Saudi Arabia says it's open to the idea of trading currencies besides the US dollar. And notice they say 3 reasons not to worry. Whenever you see not to worry in a mainstream media article, that's a pretty good sign that you should worry quite a bit. And look at this. I'm just not even going to cover it, but how many trains have derailed? This is not normal. Anyone who tells you this is gaslighting you. This is not normal for this many trains to go on. It's fifth column activities. You know, who's behind it? Venetian black nobility, Davos, World Economic Forum, possibly the CCP, less likely Russia. And then you see OPEC make shock million barrel cut in new inflation risk. So, I mean, yeah, it's crazy. And so the petrodollar is done. And what that means is that sooner or later, there's going to be a mass repatriation of dollars. And I want to show you this de-dollarization chart of just to show you how rapid this change is happening. So this is the ruble yuan trade volume. So if you look here, there's basically nothing, right? The invasion begins, there's basically nothing, then there's a bit, there's a bit, there's a bit, there's a bit. Just look at this. Mind you, this is all cutting the dollar out as the middleman. So what's going to happen is one day people are going to go, wait a minute, if I can get this stuff in other dollars, and there's so many dollars printed out there, just like the big short in 2008, people realized, wait a minute, there's a lot of leverage in the system for houses. They're overvalued. I'm going to short real estate. right? People are going to essentially say the same thing and short the US dollar. And they're also going to, more importantly, liquidate treasuries. So there's this thing called Operation Sandman, which is theorized where a bunch of countries are all going to sell their currencies right around the same time. And that's particularly dangerous for the West because right now they're trying to do this controlled demolition of the financial system, World Trade Center 7 style. So they want to destroy the financial system in order to replace it with, central bank digital currencies and all that stuff they want to do, right? Which, again, Luciferians in there with Ripple and other crypto where they control the back door. Same is true of any of those Boston Dynamic robots and so forth. Like, who coded it? Luciferian mindset people, right? Again, people don't have to be engaged in an active conspiracy in order for them to meet these categories that I often talk about. It's about what your level of consciousness is, and what's happening all over the place is people who are at the Luciferian level of consciousness are becoming painfully aware that they're going to be cut out of the deal. Like, I'm going to, in a future episode when I do the Luciferians, I'm going to talk about how Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan has sort of come around out of self-interest to our side to some degree. Do I think he's a good guy? No, obviously not. He's an absolutely ruthless, cutthroat businessman. But he sees writing in the wall in that much bigger firms like BlackRock and other things that are much more affiliated with that Molochian consciousness, they are planning to cut him out and others like him out. And so all over the place, the most intelligent, savvy, sophisticated people who aren't relying on the nepotism of the Molochian system, they're going to realize more and more that they need to get organized and they're smarter and that they need to do something about this proposed system, right? And so I'm going to go into that a lot more when I do the whole Luciferians show, but I just want to remind people that there's a lot of threads here. There's a lot of stuff afoot. And another thing that's very interesting and odd is that there was a series of bank raids to where the government raided banks in France and Germany in particular. And there was $100 billion fraud investigation, and it's kind of a big deal. And it's one of the many, many, many interesting things going on in the banking system. And then you have the UBS CEO, Ralph Hamers, stepping down, and then this Dutch guy is going to take over for him. So yeah, Ralph Hamers is gonna get out of there on the 5th, so early part of this next week. And by the way, I got to tell you, I can now say the angel said the bank stuff's going to take off again in this coming week, and it's only going to get worse. And I'm kind of thinking that I know when the turning point, where the April 19th is when it's going to happen. And here is the visual that I created for this. So there is an eclipse happening on the 19th of April, and it's a full solar eclipse. It doesn't go over much land other than looks like it goes over Indonesia and like just a little piece of Australia. But it's happening in with Rahu being conjunct the sun and moon in Aries in the nakshatra of Ashwini, which is ruled by Ketu, the south node. And so it's massive action, massive karma is going to happen. You'll notice merchant is here, right? You'll notice create, interestingly, a swan. In this case, I'd say a black swan. And I believe that the way that this is going to manifest is that there is going to be a wave of treasuries being sent from the east over to the west. And that then that'll happen, also with like as the sun moves the other direction from the way that the repatriating money is going, it'll go, through Russia, and that'll all be happening like right away before the West has woken up, both literally and metaphorically. I think it'll start in Asia and spread to Russia, and before the Western people really know what's happening, they'll find out that hundreds of billions of bonds have been repatriated. And I think it's going to start around or after, probably between the two eclipses, because there'll be a second partial solar eclipse that'll happen later in the year. And so you will see, though, the kickoff, so to speak, on April 19th. And I believe you're going to see rumblings this week of more all is not okay in the markets. And they could go south rather quickly, because you'll notice that they're doing a distraction in the form of Trump. But I want to also point out that this eclipse happening in Aries, that is the sign where Rahu and Ketu were in Aries in the 1929 crash. It was in October of 1929, right? So October 1st, 1929. But that was in a different nakshatra, a much less powerful one. So this would speak of a much, much, much bigger event from the point of view of the United States. It also happens in the United States' first house, according to the sidereal zodiac. And so, yeah, there's going to be a fundamental change of something very central to the U.S., the dollar. The dollar is going to more than likely hyperinflate in response to this. So I just want to reiterate, please, if you haven't already, get ready to take care of your family. That means get food, get water, get, if necessary, means defend yourself if that feels right to you. And also get yourself a network, a community. Start working on building community right away. I've been doing that where I live, and I'm really fortunate to have really excellent, really spiritually evolved people around me. And I assure you, there's people who are like you near you, and you need to find them. You can find them over Facebook. You can find them, by going to like sustainability meetings. There's different things that you can do to find these people. I assure you they exist near you, unless you live in the middle of nowhere, in which case you're probably way better off and have more time to find your people. But for people who live in cities, I assure you there's a lot of like-minded people like you. And what I mean by a lot is more than enough for you to form a nice, tight group. Even if there's, you're the minority in the city, you will be. And it's just a matter of finding your people, and then also getting right with yourself, because being able to move with grace through chaotic circumstances comes first and foremost by integrating your shadow, by working on and healing your trauma, and by taking care of your own house first and foremost, your spiritual temple, which is your body, and also especially the internal part of your temple, like your spiritual relationship to yourself. And on that note, I am another sale. It's actually the same sale, because the other one I did something wrong on it. And so 25% off all astrology readings with me until this sale will end on the 7th, which is this coming Friday. And the code is simply just spring23. I think I made the code a little too complicated last time. And I can control when it turns off, and so I don't need to make a complicated code. So yeah, spring23 is the code, 25% off any of my astrology readings. And so that's natal charts for people who are under 40. Those tend to be the most useful, unless you're in your late 30s and getting close to 40. And then sometimes that Navamsa chart is the most useful. That's that second half of life. 40 years chart. Also, I am doing spiritual counseling, which more and more people are finding that to be really helpful for them. And it's an honor and privilege to help people rediscover their own power. That's what I'm all about. It's helping people rediscover their own power. And then finally, I am opening up very limited availability, 10 slots for angelic magic, and teaching people how to connect first with the angels that are closest to us, and learning how to help them affect change in your life in a really positive and uplifting way. And then some amount of my students from these upcoming classes will go on to work with the archangels and perhaps beyond. And so there's only 10 slots available. You need to join my mailing list in order to have access to this. I'm going to be sending out the link here on Monday for those 10 angelic magic slots. So if you're interested in any form of guidance from me, I stand ready to serve. And thank you so much. And if you got this far, please hit like and subscribe, and please share it with like-minded people. Thank you so much, and have a great day. Bye.